All
Yeah.
right. Well, hello, Erin. So nice to see you.
Nice
Uh,
to see you, Belinda.
I've seen your face around. We're Facebook friends, and
Oh, good.
I know that you write a lot of poetry, and you're currently a U.S. Beat Poet Laureate, aren't you?
I think no, that's Tammy. I got made a lifetime.
Like, well, what's the difference?
Well, I don't really know. I just try to get the moniker
Right.
correct.
Okay. So, all right, your
Uh,
lifetime. That's even probably a bigger thing because
well,
that, yeah.
it's a lifetime thing. I think the US is for 1 year. So
Ah,
they'll have another one next year, but that's when they'll make Tammy a lifetime, I'm sure.
okay.
And
Well,
I think it's all up to Debbie, and she does a
right.
great job. So
Yes, yes, and it's quite an honor.
it is.
Yes. So I'm fascinated with your hippie background. Let's start with that, and we'll move on from there.
Okay, sounds good.
So the thing about a Hollywood commune and the Brotherhood of the Source. You want to tell me how you got there, and also what you learned in that process about group living, or whatever you'd like to impart to us about that.
Well, when I was before I graduated high school, it was in the 60s. I graduated in 1969, so I was tremendously affected by rock and roll music, and I had the kind of background where the rock and roll musicians' voices were more important to me than anyone else's. Everybody else who was an adult in my background seemed to be telling things that I didn't resonate to. So, so I really wanted to go to California because it seemed like that's where all the action was. And eventually, I went through what I explained to you about trying to get some formal education because other people wanted me to, but it was never my path. And I took off hitchhiking, got to California. And by the time I got there, I'm trying to make a long story short, there were a lot of psychedelic drugs involved. At that point in my life, I was very experimental and interested in other states of mind, which at the time and still I kind of relate to it as spirituality, looking for more.
Mhm.
So during one of those experiences, I was turned on to Tibetan Buddhism, and that really shifted my trajectory. I felt like now I needed to settle down somewhere where I could study that more. And at first, I didn't know about this commune, but one of my fellow Antioch dropouts had found it, and he told me about it. So I traveled there um, and joined this commune when there were really only 12 people in it. We were still running a restaurant and all that. And it was largely a life of meditation and eating well and a lot of chanting and singing and that sort of thing. And it was very beautiful. As the commune grew and got very large, uh, there were lots of frictions that got set up within the community. It was something that I didn't necessarily anticipate, but I would now because I think it's inevitable. But I was very young at the time. So I learned, and I was put in charge of a lot of things because I was one of the original members. So I was in charge of all the women at one point. It was like called the elder sister, and that was turned out to be good because later in my life I had a lot of daughters, and there was a lot of managing going on in both of those scenarios, and it was difficult, and it seemed to break my stride in terms of my internal development. I I found myself ready to leave the commune at a certain point because I was starting to feel like it wasn't the environment that originally it was for me. It was too distracting, right? And life is distracting. And communal situations like the one I was in, I when I got out of it and looked back, I could see it was quite patriarchal. We had a guru, and everybody was somewhat subservient, and whatever channeled through him during meditation was basically the word. We all um, lined up behind, and I was out of that. I just never, books were important to me. Outside sources of information were always important to me. And that was where I started getting disenchanted. So I ended up breaking away from that. And what did I do then? There's a couple of years of my life that are slightly unaccounted for. I
Oh,
think we may have reached them because I'm trying to remember. I mean, this started a whole. I was with a commune member when I left, and he I considered to have been one of my two husbands that didn't work out. And but I did have two children with him, so I started a long avalanche of my life where I was giving birth and taking care of children. It lasted for about 30 years.
well, while you were in that commune, is that when you got into plant healing?
Yes, it it was always an interest of mine, even before I hit the commune. But I found myself in Southern California with a lot more opportunity to meet people who had that common interest. And two things happened. I started volunteering at a herb shop that was run by some Czechoslovakian people who were from the old country and knew the ways of the plants. And I helped them like sweep the shop and organize the bins and everything. But I was able to sit in on a lot of classes that they taught. So that was wonderful. And the other thing was that I got involved with some people, and this turns out to be the beginning of the history of aromatherapy in the United States. Was back then in the early 70s in Southern California, because there were some European people who had come in and who had started a business and were really educating people about essential oils. So I've been into that for a very long time. And I organized a business called Crescent Aromatics, where I sit down with people and work with essential oils based on what they tell me about what they're trying to change in their lives, so that we create mixtures that are specific for them. And I still absolutely love doing that. It's probably my most lasting passion.
Do you grow your own herbs and work with those, or do you have a relationship with a company that makes the oils?
So I do a lot of gardening, or I used to before I moved here, where thousands of deer eat everything you plant.
Oh,
But up until about a year ago, I was a pretty avid gardener. And that doesn't mean that I did distillation. Distillation is when you heat the plant material and you are able to extract the essential oils. I always felt like, given my cooking skills and my nature of being kind of impetuous, that would probably be a dangerous thing for me to do without training. So and I had kids in my house, so I didn't do distillation, but I did find teachers, and they were the teachers that I met in Southern California. And I traveled to California for all of their educational programs. And I've ended up traveling with them to France at one point and going and seeing distillation. And they are still my source of essential oils, because they buy, this couple who are from Bavaria and live in San Francisco area. They travel to the distillers and know them personally and get their oils directly from them. So I know there's been no adulteration along the way. And if you're going to use them medicinally, that's very significant. So this has nothing to do with any of the multi-level marketing sources of essential oil that have grown up since then. And I'm deliberately not naming things because this isn't an advertisement, but
right. I know what you're talking about, though,
yeah.
'cause I studied and practiced with essential oils myself, and I would never attempt distillation.
I know, right?
So that people that knew that I was into that, they just assumed that I also did that, but it's much more complicated. Uh,
Yes, it is.
are you still a massage therapist?
No, I did that for 42 years full time. So that was another whole overlay. And I was very good at it. And I had a thriving practice, and I really loved the work. And then in 23, I injured myself and wasn't able to work, and was it was my first experience because I'm very healthy and have good genes, I guess, and live a kind of a safe life despite some of my adventures. I had been in terrible pain and I wasn't able to work at all. And I had the lifestyle where I needed to work. I didn't have a lot of free time. So I had to rearrange my entire life then, including giving up massage therapy. Um, Fortunately, I had started an aromatics practice, so that I can still do, and I do all the time, and I love it. Um, but yeah, I couldn't afford my life in Portsmouth, and I had lived there for 17 years, and it was a really hard decision to make. But I did find that I could, sell there, buy up here where I live now in the remote parts of Maine, um, and be retired. And honestly, it was a very good decision. I wouldn't have been able to retire otherwise. I would have been a 90-year-old massage therapist cranking them out, but my body said no,
Yeah.
and I listened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Age has a way to do that.
that's true.
In your notes, you said that you were from an intellectual family and they expected you to write. Would you
Yeah.
tell me something about that?
Well, it was in quite an old school kind of thing when I look at it now. Um, but my grandfather, my mother's father, was a professor of English literature at Phillips Exeter Academy in Exeter, New Hampshire, and his wife, had gone to Cornell and had been honored as a poet there. And on my father's side of the family, there was a little bit of that going on too. He was Harvard and MIT and all this, at an early age before one would expect. And so those two, my mom and dad, I was the oldest and I was the first grandchild. Everybody was like, dote, 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 and oh, she's going to be this and she's going to be that. And then a bunch of siblings and cousins showed up, and we used to always be expected during the summertime where we were all kind of at a family place to write poetry and put on plays and do all this entertaining when our parents were having happy hour. And and so it was kind of funny because it became an expectation, and sort of when I got older and wanted out, I had to resist it all and put it all behind me for a while. But later on, it was incubating this need to write, and the pleasure of writing, and not entertaining necessarily, but I always felt comfortable speaking, and so I was able to do poetry readings easily and stuff like that.
Tell me about your community project, Poems for Peace.
Oh, that was so much fun. It started before they made me poet laureate. I started having these dreams because my kids were all grown up, but I always enjoyed working with elementary school kids particularly. And I started having these dreams of things I could do with kids if I had an inroad into the community. One of my clients was a third grade teacher in a nearby community, and she had always had me come into her classroom and do a unit with her kids. So then she retired, so I didn't have that outlet anymore. And anyway, somehow this was a long story too, but just, the short version is that it was sort of miraculous without my academic background that Portsmouth decided to make me their poet laureate. It was kind of a little out of character for the people who had come before me, but that happened. So there I was with my opportunity, and the poet laureate does a project, and I already had my project, Poems for Peace. I wanted to be able to talk to the kids about how, as they started to recognize the reality of what our culture here in America is based on, that they knew that we could still do something about that. And I had some models for that right in the community. So, and then write about it. And I don't know, it was much more than I had anticipated. And when it had a life of its own, which I always appreciate. And so a lot of my job ended up being just creating opportunities for these children to be heard. And when they would write poetry and do art that went with their poetry, I would talk some kind of a like a restaurant or somebody into letting, or a library into letting us do a production for them and create opportunities for them to be heard. So we did that for a couple of years and it was a lot of fun.
What is blank page poetry?
Oh, blank page poetry. Well, now I have to say, Jerome Meadows from Savannah, Georgia, is the inspiration for blank page poetry. It's his thing that he does. It's his production where he drops a big panel down on the front of the stage, and his players or poets are behind the panel, so we're seen in shadow, and it's a form of a play, really. So you have to memorize your poem, which is challenging and really put us to those who became involved to the test. And the reason I know Jerome Meadows is because Portsmouth was digging in its ground in 2002, I think, to fix some sewer lines and came across graves. And these graves, it turned out after analysis, were of African American residents of Portsmouth from a long time ago. So the town had originally had a separate burying ground for these people and then built over it. And when Portsmouth, so they stopped the digging and they made a decision that was fairly unique at the time to restore some of this and make it into a memorial site for the original African burying ground. And so they went to the length of hiring Jerome Meadows, who's a person of color, to come up from Savannah and work with them on the project. So now Portsmouth has closed off an area that used to be residential. It's small and made it into a beautiful African burying ground. And it was happening when I was made Poet Laureate. So that is how I know Jerome Meadows. He came to town and I had just been made Poet Laureate, and we worked together on this. And we did a production in Portsmouth of people who had written poems to this theme behind these screens, acting out these. I mean, it was a very unique and very moving production. And we also did a small one in the burying ground on a moonlit night that not very many people saw, but I will never forget. It was also very moving.
Yeah.
So that's that.
So you were part of the cast of Pussy Riot.
Oh
Do
man.
tell, do tell.
Oh my God. I even told you about that. Well, yes, I was. And that was kind of a last hurrah before my body broke down. And it was in 2019. And in the Portsmouth community, one of the things I loved so much about it was there's so many creative people in all of the arts. So this wonderful director decided to put on Pussy Riot, which of course is a play that was written about the actions of some rebellious women in Russia who were, you know, doing what we're doing now here, you know, standing up against somebody who was trying to be the king and, you know, run everybody's lives and do it very selfishly and violently. And so they went on the streets and people mistook them for musicians, but they were really protesters. And a play was written about that because they got thrown in jail ultimately. And, you know, those stories often don't have happy endings. So anyway, I want to be part of that for the protest angle, but also because as a poet and as somebody who had done all this with children and stuff, I felt like, okay, now what else can I do? You know, and I had been in a play that was aborted in high school and never got a chance to play the part. And the play was 1984. So I thought, oh, Pussy Riot, this is perfect. You know, it was 50 years from when we didn't get to put on that play. And, you know, I was by far the oldest person in the cast. I mean, decades older than anybody else. But the guy cast me and we had an absolute blast. And somehow or other, I managed to keep up with everybody. And we put on 3 productions of Pussy Riot. And it was a highlight of my life, I have to say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I loved, you know, I felt so accepted by the cast. It was really lovely.
Do you have a couple of poems to share with us?
Yes. So I have two poems in this book that you probably know, one of our
Yeah.
beat poets put together. And I'm just going to read those two poems because they're relatively short and speak to the topic of the day. The first one is called Upping the Unimaginable on Repeat. Lure the gentle to slaughter, the ones who did good in any way they could, fall as if nothing mattered, lives countless shattered. A poetess's kindness spoke, reviled for being woke, trapped in an ambush, gutted. The great and powerful wizard behind the screen he hides, lies, screeches, slurs, cries, heartless and utterly bizarre. Fakes a leadership roster, nothing but selfish greed, no care for others' needs, unelected imposters. How to turn him out of office, how to jumpstart the healing process. And the follow up poem is called Tiny Island. So, more or less where I live now. We are but a tiny island on the edge of the end of the line, turning toward the earliest sunrise. A full day of visible fog blotting out our views, muting the skies in this climate is no surprise. We are just a wee island fastened by a causeway to the bold coast highway, our tenacious tie to the mainland we bypassed. To find a simple life, full of mists and tides and like-minded souls who would rather hold two ways past. We exist in a cold and cruel country where we feel unsafe, beleaguered and powerless, yet we can hope. We still continue our activities, let angers seethe, go calm and breathe, stay just and ready to vote. For though we are content to read books and darn socks, we'll be the first in line each time for the ballot box.
Yay, I guess. Okay, thank you so much,
Oh,
Erin.
you're welcome. Thank you, Belinda. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.